Chapter 5, Glamsehoth, Crest Bestowal Ceremony, Part 2. "They're here," said Leifir. "And right on time, huh," said Jint, staring at the video of the outside. No need to squint. The Bokbiruch just so happened to plunge into 3 space head-on from their perspective. The two were on an interstellar ship borrowed from the House of Vorlash. Diruz had tried to give them a steerer as well, but Leifir had shot the suggestion down. She would equip the control gauntlet herself. As for why they were going out of their way to go meet the Bokbiruch, they wanted to see its damage status for themselves, and as soon as they could. They'd heard from the conveyance ship that had returned a little while earlier that the damage was minimal, but nonetheless, they couldn't help feeling worried. Leifir steered near the Bokbiruch. Focusing on her Frokras, she closed her eyes and made several rounds around it. "Where did it get hit?" "I can't tell," she said. "Well, if you don't know, then I definitely don't." He was looking at the interstellar ship through the video of the outside, but spotted no sign of damage by fire anywhere on it. Yet the fact remained it had been shot at. And that fact was nothing to scoff at. "Oh well, we're going in." Leifir pulled up communications with the bridge of the Bokbiruch. Yestash came to greet them on the arrival deck. Hurriedly, they exchanged the formal salutations, and then the two stepped aboard a personal transporter headed for the conference room. "The attack was so feeble as to leave something to be desired," said Yestash. "No harm was done to our navigation capabilities, and we managed to enact all repairs on our own." "Did you do the repairs while in planar space?" asked Jint. "No. We did them while in orbit over the land world of Martinu." "Why did you have to do that? Wasn't it dangerous?" "Is this of sarcasm?" he wondered. "Needless to say, we paid due attention to remaining safe. We slightly raised our orbital altitude. But if there was no impediment to the ship's navigation, then..." Yestesh gave Jint a puzzled look. Leifir, too, stared at him searchingly. "Did I, say something dumb, or..." he asked the royal princess. Leifir let out a little sigh. "Don't you see? If they'd entered the portal as soon as they got shot, it would appear as though they were fleeing." Sure, it might be misconstrued as such, but Jint was confused. He thought the Ov wouldn't hesitate to circumvent avoidable adversity. "I know the Star Forces aren't afraid to retreat. Plus, this ship's almost unarmed." "We retreat when we absolutely have to," said Leifir. "If there isn't any impediment to navigation after sustaining a surprise attack, there isn't any need to flee either." "But you don't know that for sure, do you? It could have just been a warning of more to come. There's no telling if a full-scale assault is coming for you later." "You are correct. I simply made a judgment call," said Yestash. "What judgment did you make?" "I figured that if we retreated after taking such a small attack, we might be giving the enemy a false indication. And if they underestimate us, then the situation might deteriorate." "What do you mean?" "I know you understand the Star Force's maxims of conduct, Lani Dryor. You're a member of our armed forces, after all, and have aided us in battle. If the mistaken notion that the Star Forces flee at the meagerest provocation takes root, what consequences do you think will result?" Jint understood what Yestash was getting at. The maxims of conduct of the Star Forces were extremely simple. In short, they aimed to repay all damage received 10 times over. The Ov were a mercantile race, but this was the one instance they spared no expense, the one instance they didn't consider profit margins. Jint had always thought this lust for revenge quite childish of the Ov, but it wasn't about to change. It had been this way since the founding of the Empire, no, since before then, when the Ov were itinerant spacefarers. Moreover, upon some consideration, there was a logic to it. It was not uncommon for Ov ships to become isolated, in times of war and in times of peace. The Empire needed only put up with their reputation as savages and regard their gruesome and dazzling orgies of vengeance as an unfortunate obligation to dramatically elevate the safety levels for all lone Ovs everywhere. Or at least, that was the Empire's take on the matter. "I don't mean to be rude, but might it be the case that the fine people of Your Excellency's home world don't well know how the Star Forces behave?" asked Yestash, dealing the final blow. That's maybe true," Jint acknowledged reluctantly. "It was known throughout the galaxy how the Empire behaved. Otherwise, the safety of Ovs in places the Empire's tentacles didn't reach couldn't be safeguarded. As it stood, it was deemed a fool's endeavor to take an aggressive attitude against of ships without resolving to go to all-out war. However, it was highly questionable whether the Martinese, who hadn't even known of the existence of the Empire until a mere decade prior, knew any of that. In fact, if they had known, they wouldn't have attacked the Bokbaruch. So, were there any casualties among the crew? Asked Jint, changing the subject. None whatsoever. 90% of the crew didn't even realize we had gotten attacked to begin with. That's a relief, he replied, though his self-esteem as a Martinese did get wounded. Did you get attacked out of nowhere? Yes, we did. They gave us no warning. Why in heavens did they go? And perhaps they found our continual low-orbit revolutions trying for negotiations objectionable, said Yestesh calmly. We were attacked from the surface. Jint had already been informed of this through the report he'd read. He reckoned this was a half-baked state of affairs. If the attack had come from a force up in space, then they would have riled the ire of the star forces, which would then attempt to eradicate all hidden enemy fleets. An attack from the surface, however, wasn't liable to change anything at all. Even if that's the case, I still don't get it, said Jint. Don't they know attacking a ship from the surface isn't going to have any effect? I was secretly hoping you would be able to explain it to me, Lani Dryor. Yestesh's tone was dripping with low-key disappointment. I'm sorry I couldn't live up to your expectations. The transporter arrived at the conference room. They moved to the table in the center and listened to the official report. Above the flower garden that extended across the room, the map of Martinu was suspended in the air. The numbers of hostile forces on the surface is estimated at around 20,000, began Yestesh. They are principally composed of the Matai 12th Division of the People's Sovereign Stellar Union. The PSSU, said Jint, a little surprised. He was aware that the Empire's enemy was the Three Nations Alliance, which included the PSSU. But he always ended up chalking up the nations besides the United Humankind as the UH's second bananas. Plus, it would have been less surprising if they'd been troops from the Greater Alcant Republic. Each of the interstellar powers found securing the loyalty of their constituents a significant challenge. The Humankind Empire of alone was totally unconcerned, expecting no loyalty out of the land-world citizens of its star systems. On the contrary, they wanted the land peoples under their rule to spend no time thinking about the world beyond their planets, and to focus on making their respective land worlds as wealthy as possible. Those oddballs who did care about worlds beyond had a place in the Empire as imperial citizens. Unlike the Empire, the other four nations did worry themselves over questions of nationalist loyalty, each trying to solve the issue in their own ways. The UH was the most zealous, as they were expending almost poignant amounts of effort attempting to homogenize the culture of all the planetary societies under them. Then again, only outside observers were so prone to deem such efforts moving. There were many among the direct recipients of the zeal of the UH's interstellar government who cringed and recoiled. Various currents of strife and dissension existed, especially in the star systems that joined the UH in recent times. By comparison, the Greater Alcant Republic was a rather more compact nation, yet even they had not succeeded in painting all their systems in a single stroke of homogenization. They were only barely managing to maintain interstellar hegemony through the prominence of the politics, economics, culture, and sheer population of its main star system, named Alcant. The land worlds of the Hania Federation were made up of settlers from the Sume star system and their descendants. They didn't need to put in much effort for cultural homogeneity to persist. They did, however, have a small number of systems with heterogeneous cultures and, moreover, the localism of each star system was on the rise as of late, chipping into the overall homogeneity. Finally, there was the People's Sovereign Stellar Union, which had given up on arousing patriotic sentiment toward the interstellar government among the general public. In other words, they were the lander interstellar power that ran things under the most of-like philosophy. Each star system had great autonomy, and the coalition was a loose one. Each star system even maintained its own army. The PSSU was, in essence, a mere mishmash of affiliated systems. Of course, this made its Confederate-style military less cost-effective than a single overarching military force would be, but it seemed they put up with that as part and parcel of the concept of a federation. From what Jint's risk gear was telling him, The Matai 12th Division was officially the Matai Star System Land Army 12th Division. He also learned that Matai was a run-of-the-mill system of around 200 million. According to Star Force's analyses, the PSSU was the most lacking in enthusiasm for the war. It looked as though they were only participating because they felt the UH more of a threat than the Empire. If they'd refused to enter the fray alongside the UH, they were risking war against the UH. In any case, it was incomparable in terms of strength. It would have gotten crushed as a side note in the war if the UH weren't doing most of the fighting. If the UH were to win this war even without the help of the PSSU, then the UH would at some point wage battle against the PSSU due to breach of treaty, which would inevitably lead to the PSSU's defeat and forced homogenization. On the other hand, if they lost the war against the Empire fighting alongside the UH, the lives of ordinary people across all of its various land worlds would remain unchanged. And while war was a detestable institution, if they had to fight someone no matter what, they decided they'd rather face off against the Empire. Given all that, Jin couldn't grasp why a stranded PSSU division wouldn't surrender. Of course, this didn't mean that the PSSU had officially made that tough decision. This was based on one-sided speculation on the part of the Empire. Even if it ended up being true, it was just the general opinion. Upon reflection, it was comical to assume that every single soldier was weary of war. It wouldn't be outlandish to assume the opposite, that the Matai 12th Division was composed almost entirely of troops who saw the value in fighting the Empire. It would certainly make sense of the desperation of their struggles. I don't know how seriously to take the possibility, but perhaps the administration is in effect under military occupation, said Yestesh. Is it the enemy commander who's speaking on behalf of the planet? No. Formally, it's Corinth Till, said Yestesh, saying Till Corinth's name in the of order. But there's a chance he is acting as a puppet. Till? A puppet? Yeah, right, thought Jint. But 10 whole years had passed since his and Till's tragic parting. People change, and he didn't delude himself that he'd known every inch of the man when they were together. Jint had been a child, and he'd only ever known home life Till. I hope that's what's going on, said Leifier. If the land world says they want to be left alone, it will be put off for later. But if they're being forced to say that by another nation's military, the Empire can't let that stand. It'd be convenient for us, that's for sure, he said. His voice had come out so tight it startled even him. Leifier looked suspicious. Are you angry? I'm just worried. Jin faced Yestesh. They may be a PSSU land division, but even they must know shooting a ship in orbit from the surface is futile. It wouldn't even serve as a warning. Yes, that's why we regard the possibility as low. Civilized people with common sense with regards to how the galaxy functions wouldn't do this. The attack was the sort of folly a land people long isolated from the rest of humanity might perpetrate, however. Ouch! They've forgotten I'm a member of that long isolated land people, the two of them, thought Jint. Now then, here is where the laser cannon was fired, said Yestesh, as a point on the map flashed. Big Charl. Jint smiled bittersweetly and explained to the investigator what that peculiar phrase meant. It's the name of the laser cannon. Well, one of the 4 laser cannons, the 4 de Antabita in Martinese. There's also Big Al, Big Bill, and Big Do. We constructed them before our world had even learned of planar space navigation. I thought they'd have dismantled them ages ago, but I guess they're still around. It must be because there was no hurry to do so. They can't have felt them a threat. Once again, Jint's patriotic heart took a stinging hit, but he couldn't let that show. Could you recreate the ship's trajectory on the map? Certainly. A curved line appeared on the map, representing the Bakbaruch's course. Its altitude was also displayed. If that's the course the ship took, then 3 of the 4 de Antabita would have been able to attack simultaneously, said Jint. But they didn't, which I think means they weren't aiming to completely destroy the ship. So it was a warning after all? If that's what the Land World Administration is thinking, then this is an indication that they either can't or don't want to turn back. I see, said Yestesh, nodding. But isn't that what you would call a warning? Not necessarily, said Jint, shaking his head. They weren't expressing their will to the of. They were expressing their will to themselves. But what makes you say that? And I'm afraid I don't understand what you're saying to begin with. Why would they need to express their will to themselves? I know that I, at the very least, don't need to. The head of the government, that is to say, Martinua's land world citizen representative, was never an autocratic ruler, and I'm betting that hasn't changed since I lived there. There may have been strong opposition to maintaining independence. I think it's pretty safe to assume there was, actually. So firing Vig Charl was probably effective in silencing the opposition. It wasn't meant to sway us, it was meant to sway other planetary factions. I just can't understand it, said Yestash, utterly perplexed. Isn't an act on the level of firing at a foreign vessel something that should be carried out only after securing a consensus? That would have been the wiser way to do things, said Jint, smiling. But that's the way it's done on my home planet. Creating fait accompli, that is. Leifier looked bereft of words. Well, if your excellency says so, then let's take it as true, he said, not looking particularly impressed. Setting that aside, let's focus on the future. If the Land World Administration has made up their minds, which, to be quite honest, it didn't even occur to me that they might not have, but either way, what do we do from here? I think our first step is to tell them this isn't the fait accompli they want it to be. It's true that this ship's scars are so slight as to not warrant retribution. Exactly. And I don't think Martinu has the firepower to dish out damage serious enough to ever warrant any retribution. Jint kept the word unfortunately to himself. Not that I know anything about the Matai 12th Division's firepower, obviously. If they're furnished with specialized equipment, then it's a different story, but as it stands, I don't believe they have the ability to shoot ships out of orbit, either. In that case, I'll go talk to them. But I want to go with the minimum possible number of people. The antimatter fuel factory construction team's scheduled to arrive shortly, but I'll put this here. Of course. But I can come with you, can't I? Asked Leifier. Sure. 'Cause this time, I'm probably not leaving the ship anyway. I wouldn't let you. Nothing good ever happens when you touch down on a land world. I came back safe and sound from my visit to Delk 2, didn't I? You spent all of your time there tormenting your own liver, she pointed out. After a while, Yestesh finished his briefing and exited the conference room. Another job was apparently waiting for him. Jint remained there, gazing at the map of Martinu. Would the day he could once again walk the land of fantastical life forms ever come? Jint, Leifier called from behind. What? I must apologize to you. You mean for saying it'd be better for us if the planet was under military occupation, he said, looking back at her. Right, Leifier nodded. It was thoughtless of me. I know this land world was your home, but sometimes I forget. I do, too, Jint smiled. But it is my home, nonetheless. I don't want a ground war to happen here. Of course, a ground war would be the pits anywhere else, too. Space battles were different. The vast majority of people in ship-on-ship combat were soldiers, and those that weren't were there to serve. Sure, levels of enthusiasm varied between them, and some may have entered the army thinking there would never actually be a war, but at the end of the day, space battles were waged between those who resolved to fight. Ground battles, however, inevitably involved innocent civilians. Yes, naturally. I don't like ground wars either. Just the thought of enemies and allies fighting while breathing the same air makes me shudder. Jint had a feeling Leifier disliked ground wars for very different reasons, but he decided not to pursue it. But for argument's sake, what would you do if they were under an occupation? She asked. That's a tough nut to crack, he replied. If they're still under occupation, we can't exactly choose to leave them be. But then that'd lead to a ground war on my home planet. What's your ultimate goal for your star fief? That's easy. I want to just forget about the wider galaxy and live a peaceful life on my land world. So, if we don't attack the space-bound facilities of the Empire, I don't need to worry myself about trading either. What a waste. By not engaging in commerce, you're throwing away 90% of your potential wealth. And be stinking rich with just 10%. Besides, having loads of money doesn't mean a thing if you've got no way to spend it. Jint snapped his fingers, having remembered something. Oh yeah, I've got to repay my debt to the House of Cryeb. But there's no rush, right? Not in my eyes, said Leifier. The best client for a moneylender is one who pays their interest and borrows for a long time. Good. Jint's eyes returned to the map. Why's planar space navigation gotta exist, anyway? If the speed of light were the absolute limit, then I and the people of my planet wouldn't have had to suffer so. Leifir chuckled. My father often makes the same sort of remarks. His Highness the King of Cryeb? But why? If it weren't for planar space navigation, the Empire couldn't keep going. If there were no planar space navigation, then we wouldn't have needed to build the Empire. He claims we would still be roaming the galaxy like our ancestors. Is that a more blissful existence? My father seems to find the idea charming enough. It's like he was born too late. Born too late, huh? I think the same could be said for the people of my home. But while Filar Cryeb is pining for the distant past, the Martinese are pining for an age all of the adults experience directly. That's why they may be super fixated on it. And you mean to turn back the clock for them? That's not in the cards. There's no way we could ever return to total isolation. But we can give them that illusion. If we don't trade with other systems, the people won't ever lay eyes on products from other territory nations, and if we block information, then they can live without the fear that comes with the active awareness of being a tiny corner of a vast interstellar power. Would that bring your land world citizens true happiness? Let me assure you my father's nostalgia for a bygone age is a quirk of his own. I, for one, don't believe for a second that the space roving age was better, and most ofs don't either. It's not at all a rare opinion among my land world citizens, though. But if they wish to wrap themselves in a happy fiction, then everyone must constantly make sure reality never pokes a hole in the veil. I know. There must be loads who prefer reality, especially the generation born after mine. And for their sakes, I'll give them the opportunity to face it. That's the best idea I could think up anyway. The best for my fellow citizens. I see you've given it a lot of thought, she said admiringly. I know it's hard to believe, but could you do me a favor and acknowledge I've got enough gray matter to squirt out a thought or two once in a while? He sighed, poking at his head. Your gray matter occasionally produces some erratic ideas. Really? Yep. That's why I sometimes have to wonder whether you're thinking anything at all. Well, you're observant. There are those times, he admitted. But this is my home. Trust me, I've thought about it. A whole lot, actually. I feel I've got a life mission here. And not in the Star Forces? If I stay in the Star Forces, I'd just be one of tens of thousands of quartermaster star pilots. I've done a decent job of it, but there's any number who can easily replace me. But as of now, there's only one Lord who knows the ins and outs of Martinu. You have a point. I can't speak for other worlds, but for this one, you are qualified in a way that's hard to come by for lieges the galaxy over. I'm sure everyone will look on your work with gratitude. I doubt it, said Jint, his heart cold. My father and I must be in the textbooks as traitors. He, the man who sold out the planet he was born and raised onto the Empire to become a noble, and his son, the brazen-faced child who'd wield the scepter after him. I don't know which of us is more hated. But at the very least I know I'm villain number 2 in this story. You're such a pessimist. No way. I'm looking forward to it. I think I might live to see my name used in a spicy proverb. All right then. Leifir stared him in the face. What? He said, unsettled. It's nothing much. I was just thinking I'm glad I took leave. Planar space navigation ain't all bad, he thought. Without it, I would never have met Leifir. Jint's wrist gear beeped. He peered at the lines of text that floated on screen. It was a short message from the captain, bidding him to come to the bridge at once. Which was all well and good, but there was a phrase in the message he'd never heard before. Leifir? Do you know what a Trampleblit squadron is?